Have you ever had a morning that started so ordinary, it felt like 1,000 others, only to become the single moment your entire life pivots on? A moment so sharp and defining, it splits your world into a before and an after? For Amelia, that morning began with the smell of coffee and the gentle clinking of a spoon against ceramic. The sun streamed through the kitchen window of the home she'd built, not with bricks and mortar, but with 15 years of love, sacrifice, and unwavering support for her husband, Mark. He sat across from her, his face a mask she suddenly realized she could no longer read. He hadn't touched his toast. He pushed his plate away, the sound scraping against the quiet air, and looked at her. His eyes, once the warm harbors she had run to for comfort, were cold and distant, like a winter sea. "Amelia," he began, his voice flat, devoid of the affection that had once been the soundtrack of her life. "This isn't working anymore." She felt a chill creep over her skin, a premonition that coiled in her stomach. She could only stare, her own spoon frozen halfway to her lips. "What isn't working, Mark?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. He wouldn't meet her gaze, focusing instead on a spot on the wall just over her shoulder. "Us," he said, the word a wrecking ball to the architecture of her world. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Divorce. It was a word for other people, for whispered stories and cautionary tales. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for her and Mark. She searched his face for a hint of a joke, a cruel, misguided prank, but found nothing but grim finality. Her heart, which had beat a steady rhythm for him for half her life, began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Before she could form a reply, before the tears could even well in her eyes, a sound cut through the suffocating silence. The doorbell. A sharp, insistent chime that seemed to mock the stillness of their shattered moment. Mark's jaw tightened. A flicker of something panic? Annoyance crossed his face. "Don't answer that," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. But Amelia was already moving, a strange, disconnected automaton rising from her chair, compelled by the simple, ingrained habit of answering her own door. She needed to escape the paralyzing gravity of that table, of that one, life-altering word. She walked through the hall, each step an eternity, the insistent ringing growing louder, a soundtrack to the implosion of her reality. She reached for the handle, her hand trembling, and pulled the door open. On her doorstep stood a young woman, drenched from a sudden downpour, her face pale and etched with desperation. But it wasn't her rain-soaked hair or her terrified eyes that made the air leave Amelia's lungs. It was the undeniable, pronounced swell of her belly beneath her thin coat. The woman's eyes locked with Amelia's, a silent, desperate plea in their depths. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sob escaped. Then, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she crumpled to the ground, a heap of damp fabric and devastating secrets on Amelia's welcome mat. The world seemed to slow down, the sound of the rain and the thud of the woman's body against the porch echoing in Amelia's ears. For a heartbeat, she was paralyzed, caught between the wreckage of her marriage in the kitchen and the human crisis unfolding at her feet. Mark appeared behind her, his face a canvas of pure, undiluted panic. "I told you not to answer it," he hissed, his words not of concern for the woman, but of fury at the exposure. And in that instant, Amelia understood. The swollen belly, the desperation in the woman's eyes, Mark's terror, the pieces of a puzzle she never knew existed slammed into place with brutal clarity. This was not a stranger. This was the reason. The why behind the cold pronouncement that had just dismantled her life. A wave of white-hot rage washed over her, so potent it momentarily cleared the fog of shock. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to unleash 15 years of suppressed frustrations and fresh betrayals. She wanted to slam the door shut and pretend neither of them were there. But then she looked down at the young woman, so fragile and still on the cold, wet stone. Her coat had fallen open, revealing the full curve of her pregnancy. She was just a girl, really, looking no older than her early 20s. And beneath the anger, a deeper, more profound instinct took over. It was the instinct of a woman who had spent her life caring for others, a decency that Mark's cruelty could not extinguish. While Mark stood frozen, a statue of self-preservation, Amelia dropped to her knees. Her hands, still trembling, went to the woman's neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint but steady. "Mark, call 911, she ordered, her voice firm, cutting through his panicked inertia. He stared at her, dumbfounded, as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "Amelia, don't you understand what's happening? We need to get her out of here." His voice was a frantic whisper, laced with a cowardice that turned her stomach. "She is unconscious and pregnant on our doorstep," Amelia shot back, her gaze like ice. "She needs a doctor, not to be dragged into an alley like a piece of trash. Call." Now, the authority in her tone, a voice he hadn't heard in years, finally broke through his self-absorbed fear. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed. As he stammered information to the dispatcher, Amelia gently brushed the wet hair from the woman's face. She saw the fear lines, the exhaustion, the youth. This wasn't a monster who had come to destroy her life. This was a victim, just as she was. A different kind of victim, perhaps, but a pawn in Mark's selfish game all the same. The thought did not lessen her own pain, but it carved out a small, separate space for a different emotion, a startling, unwelcome surge of empathy. She was looking at the physical embodiment of her husband's betrayal, and yet, all she could see was a person in desperate need of help. In that moment, kneeling in the rain beside her husband's pregnant lover, Amelia felt the old version of herself, the compliant, gentle, accommodating wife, begin to die, and someone new, someone stronger and colder and infinitely more clear-eyed, began to take her place. The piercing wail of the ambulance siren grew closer, a sound that sliced through the quiet suburban morning. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Amelia was vaguely aware of the eyes on her home, on the scene unfolding on her porch. She felt a flush of shame, not for her actions, but for the public spectacle of her private ruin. The paramedics were efficient, their movements practiced and calm, a stark contrast to the turbulent chaos in Amelia's heart. They loaded the young woman onto a gurney, her face pale against the white sheets, and 4-line already being threaded into the back of her hand. One of them, a kind-faced man with tired eyes, turned to Amelia. "Are you coming with her, ma'am? Are you family?" The question hung in the air, a cruel, ironic jab. Family. Was she? Was this woman now, somehow, tied to her forever? She looked at Mark, who was hovering by the doorway, looking desperate for the entire world to swallow him whole. He shook his head almost imperceptibly, a clear signal for her to say no, to cut the cord, to let this problem be carted away to a hospital where it could be someone else's. But Amelia looked back at the gurney, at the vulnerable, anonymous swell under the blanket. The baby. There was a baby in there, an innocent life caught in the crossfire of its father's weakness. Yes, Amelia heard herself say, the word feeling both foreign and absolutely certain on her tongue. "I'm coming." She grabbed her purse and keys from the hall table, not daring to look at Mark's face, a mixture of fury and disbelief. She followed the gurney into the ambulance, the doors closing behind her with a definitive thud, sealing her in with the consequence of her husband's actions. The ride was a blur of bumps and muffled radio chatter. Amelia sat on the small bench seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of the woman's chest, synced to the hiss of the oxygen mask. Her mind, now free from the immediate crisis, began to race backwards. She replayed the last few months, the last few years, hunting for clues she had missed. Mark's late nights at the office, which she'd attributed to his ambition. The new, expensive cologne he'd started wearing. The way he'd become more protective of his phone, angling it away from her when it buzzed. Each memory was now tainted, a breadcrumb leading to this very moment, this very ambulance. She had believed they were building a life together. He had been building a second one, a secret one, in the shadows. The betrayal was so vast, so complete, it was almost incomprehensible. It wasn't just an affair, it was a parallel existence he had constructed with lies and deceit, all while sharing her bed, her home, her life. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay, and the sterile, impersonal world of the hospital swallowed them whole. As they wheeled the gurney through the automatic doors into the bright, antiseptic light, Amelia felt a profound sense of dislocation. Just an hour ago, she had been a wife, sitting in her sunny kitchen. Now, she was a stranger in a hospital, the designated guardian for her husband's pregnant mistress. She was a woman whose life had been a lie, and the truth was an unconscious girl on a stretcher, carrying a secret that was about to change everything. Amelia found herself in a small, cold waiting room, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and quiet anxiety. The vinyl chair stuck to her skin, and the ticking clock on the wall seemed to be counting down the seconds of her old life. Every tick was another moment further away from the woman she used to be. She stared at her hands, noticing for the first time how they were shaking. They were capable hands, hands that had gardened, cooked, and held Mark's for 15 years. Now they felt useless, alien. After what felt like an eternity, Mark burst through the waiting room doors. He didn't look for her to offer comfort or a shared sense of shock. His face was a thundercloud of rage. He strode over to her, his voice a low, furious hiss that was somehow louder than a shout. "What in the world do you think you're doing, Amelia? Why did you come here? You've made this 1,000 times worse." His accusation was so outrageously selfish it took her breath away. A young woman, the mother of his unborn child, was lying in a hospital bed somewhere in this building, and his primary concern was damage control. His own image. His own inconvenience. "She collapsed," Mark, Amelia said, her voice dangerously quiet. "She needed help. I did what any decent human being would do, a decent human being," he scoffed, running a frantic hand through his hair. "She came to our house. She was trying to ruin me. And you played right into her hands. You brought her here, making it look like we're all one big, happy, complicated family. Do you have any idea how this looks?" The sheer audacity of his victimhood was staggering. He was the architect of this entire disaster, the one who had lied and cheated and created this tangled web, and yet he stood before her, painting himself as the wronged party. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to burn in Amelia's chest. It was the fire of righteous anger, forged in the crucible of that morning's pain. She stood up, slowly, deliberately, so she was looking him directly in the eye. For the first time, she didn't feel smaller than him. She felt his equal. "I don't care how it looks, Mark," she said, her voice steady and clear, echoing with a newfound strength. "I care that a pregnant woman is in distress. A woman you put in this position. This isn't about you or your reputation. For once in your life, can you think about someone other than yourself?" He recoiled as if she'd slapped him. He was so accustomed to her placid nature, her quiet agreement, that this direct confrontation left him speechless. He opened and closed his mouth, searching for a rebuttal, but found none. His anger deflated, replaced by a desperate, pathetic panic. He saw his carefully constructed world crumbling, and he saw, perhaps for the first time, that the gentle woman he had so carelessly discarded was not going to be the one to help him sweep up the pieces. She was standing in the middle of the rubble, refusing to move. Just as the tension between them reached its breaking point, a woman in blue scrubs with a kind but firm face approached them, a chart in her hand. "Are you the ones who came in with Jane Doe?" she asked, her eyes flicking between Amelia's resolute calm and Mark's agitated state. Mark immediately straightened up, attempting to regain some semblance of control. "I'm her associate," he stammered, a lie so flimsy it was insulting. "I'm taking care of this." The nurse's gaze lingered on him for a moment, a practiced, assessing look that missed nothing, before turning to Amelia. "You were the one who made the call? And came in the ambulance?" Amelia simply nodded, unable to speak. "Your quick thinking likely made a significant difference," the nurse said, her voice softening with professional approval. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. "We've stabilized her for now, but she's suffering from severe dehydration and exhaustion. The baby's heartbeat is steady, thankfully. She was very lucky you were there." The validation, small as it was, felt like a lifeline. In a world that had suddenly turned upside down, This stranger's words affirmed that her instincts had been right. She had chosen compassion over anger, and it had mattered. The nurse's praise was a quiet indictment of Mark's panicked self-interest, a fact that was not lost on him. He shifted his weight, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Is she awake? Can I see her?" Amelia asked, ignoring Mark completely. "She's awake but very weak," the nurse replied. "Her name is Chloe. She's been asking for you, actually, for me." Amelia was stunned. "Not for him," she added, gesturing almost imperceptibly towards Mark. The nurse's expression was professional, but her eyes conveyed a deep understanding. "She asked to see the woman who helped her. The woman from the house. She's in room 304. You can go in, but please keep it brief." "She needs to rest." As Amelia turned to go, Mark grabbed her arm. "You are not going in there," he commanded, his voice once again a low growl. "This is my mess. I'll handle it." Amelia looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up to his face. She pulled her arm away with a slow, deliberate motion. "No, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a chilling finality. "You are wrong. This was your mess. Now it's bigger than you. You don't get to handle it. You don't get to control this narrative anymore." She turned her back on him and walked down the hallway toward room 304, each step feeling more certain than the last. She was walking away from the man he was and toward the woman she was becoming. The door to the room was slightly ajar. She took a deep breath, pushing it open, and stepped inside, ready to face the other side of her husband's betrayal. The hospital room was dim, the only light coming from the hallway and the soft green glow of the monitors beside the bed. Chloe lay small and fragile against the stark white pillows, her face pale and her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. And 4 drip was taped to her arm, slowly feeding life back into her. When she saw Amelia, a flicker of something, shame, perhaps, or relief, crossed her features. "You stayed," Chloe whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't think you would." Amelia moved closer, pulling the visitor's chair to the bedside. She sat down, the space between them charged with unspoken things, betrayal, anger, and a strange, shared pain. "The nurse said you were asking for me," Amelia said, her tone neutral, a deliberate effort to keep her own churning emotions at bay. Chloe nodded, tears welling in her eyes and spilling onto the pillow. "I needed to. I had to say I'm sorry," she choked out. "I never wanted to hurt you. He told me it was over between you two. For months. He said you were just roommates, living separate lives until the finances were sorted out. He said you hadn't loved each other in years." The confession landed in the quiet room, each word a fresh sting. Mark hadn't just cheated. He had systematically dismantled Amelia's character, painting her as a cold, unloving woman to justify his actions to his new lover. He had erased their 15 years of history, rewriting it as a loveless sham. It was a betrayal deeper than infidelity. It was a betrayal of her very identity. Amelia looked at the weeping young woman in the bed and saw not a homewrecker, but a girl who had been fed a fantasy by a master manipulator. "He told you I was the one who was cold?" Amelia asked, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her lips. "He said you deserved to be happy, and so did he," Chloe continued, her words tumbling out in a rush of desperate honesty. "He swore he was going to tell you to leave properly. He was renting an apartment for us, for the baby. He promised. But every week there was another excuse. Another delay. This morning I couldn't take it anymore. I told him I was coming to the house to get the truth. I just wanted to look you in the eye. I didn't know. I never would have." She trailed off, sobbing quietly. The picture became painfully clear. Mark hadn't been on the verge of a noble confession. He had been cornered. Chloe had called his bluff, and his only move had been to detonate the bomb at breakfast before she could. He hadn't chosen to leave Amelia. His hand had been forced. For a long moment, Amelia was silent, processing the sheer scale of his deception. He had lied to them both, playing them against each other, keeping them in separate, carefully curated boxes. He had loved neither of them enough to tell the truth. He had only loved himself. "He lied to you," Amelia said finally, her voice soft but firm. "He lied to both of us in that shared admission, a fragile, unexpected bridge formed across the chasm of their circumstance. They were not friends. They were not allies. But they were, in that moment, two women who had been profoundly wronged by the same man. A profound shift occurred within Amelia as she sat by Chloe's bedside. The searing heat of her personal pain began to cool, replaced by a cold, clear anger directed squarely at Mark. She saw his cruelty not just as an attack on her marriage, but as a pattern of behavior. He had used Chloe's youth and her love for him, spinning a web of lies to keep her compliant and hidden. When she had threatened to become inconvenient, he was ready to discard her just as coldly as he had discarded Amelia herself. The true victim in this room, she realized, was not just her. It was this scared young woman, and more than anyone, the innocent child she was carrying. A fierce, protective instinct rose in Amelia, an instinct she hadn't felt in years. It was a feeling that went beyond her own hurt feelings, anchoring itself in a fundamental sense of right and wrong. "Does he know?" Amelia asked quietly. "About the baby? Did you tell him?" Chloe nodded weakly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I told him weeks ago." At first, he seemed happy. Scared, but happy. He said it was a sign that it would make everything real. But then, he grew distant. He started talking about options. About how complicated this would make things for his career. For his divorce settlement, the words hung in the air, chilling Amelia to the bone. He had known. He had known about the baby when he sat across from her at the breakfast table, callously declaring their marriage over without a single word of the real reason. He wasn't just leaving her for another woman. He was leaving her to simplify the problem of an unwanted pregnancy. He was running from responsibility. "Do you have family?" Amelia asked, her voice gentle. "Someone I can call for you?" Chloe shook her head, a fresh wave of despair washing over her face. "My parents live across the country. They wouldn't approve. I haven't told them. Mark was all I had here. He was my whole world." Her voice broke on the last few words, and the loneliness in the room was palpable. She was utterly alone, abandoned by the man who had promised her everything, about to bring a child into a world with no support system. Amelia's heart ached. It was an ache that transcended jealousy and bitterness. It was the simple, human ache of witnessing another's desolation. She thought of the home she had so lovingly curated, the spare bedroom she had always imagined might one day be a nursery. A wild, impossible thought began to form in her mind, a thought so radical it scared her. But as she looked at Chloe's terrified face, the thought didn't seem so crazy after all. It felt necessary. It felt like the only decent thing to do in a world that had suddenly been stripped of all decency. Before she could explore it further, the door to the room swung open with a sharp crack, and Mark stood there, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was no longer panicked. He was on the offensive. And he was not alone. Flanking him were two older figures, his parents, their faces etched with disapproval and aimed squarely at Amelia. Mark strode into the room, his parents trailing behind him like a disapproving honor guard. His father, a man who had always treated Amelia with a cool, corporate distance, glared at her as if she were a hostile employee. His mother, a woman who had once praised her homemade pies, looked at her with undisguised contempt. Their presence was a clear tactic, to intimidate, to overwhelm, to frame Amelia as the problem. "Amelia, this has gone on long enough," Mark said, his voice imbued with a false authority. "My parents are here. We are going to sort this out. You need to leave." "This is a private family matter." The words were meant to cut her out, to render her irrelevant. But he had miscalculated. He was trying to wield the power of a family she was no longer a part of, against a bond he couldn't possibly understand was forming in this very room. "A private family matter?" Amelia repeated, her voice calm but ringing with steel. She stood up, placing herself protectively between Mark and Chloe's bed. "Are you referring to this family?" she asked, gesturing to his parents. "Or the new one you were trying to create in secret?" Chloe flinched in the bed, pulling the sheet up to her chin. Mark's mother, Eleanor, stepped forward. Young lady, she said, her voice dripping with condescension as she addressed Amelia. You are creating a scene. Mark has told us everything. He has made a mistake, yes, but this public display is humiliating. You need to think about the family's reputation. Amelia turned her gaze to her mother-in-law. The family's reputation, she said, her voice dropping. Your son lied to me for months, maybe years. He got this young woman pregnant with promises of a future, and when it became difficult, he tried to throw both of them away. And you are worried about your reputation? You should be worried about his soul. The directness of her words stunned them into silence. They were used to the quiet, agreeable Amelia. They were not prepared for this warrior who had risen from the ashes of her grief. Mark, seeing he was losing control, turned his anger on Chloe. And you, he snarled, pointing a finger at the bed. I told you to wait. I told you I would handle this. You've ruined everything. Chloe shrank back, tears streaming down her face. Seeing her fear, seeing Mark's cruelty laid bare, was the final catalyst for Amelia. All hesitation, all doubt evaporated. She knew exactly what she had to do. She turned her back on Mark and his parents and faced Chloe directly. Her voice was soft, but it filled the entire room. Chloe, she said, ignoring the fuming family behind her. You are not alone in this. I will not let him abandon you. Then, she turned back to face Mark, her eyes blazing. You wanted a divorce, Mark. You'll get it. You wanted the house. You can fight me for it. But one thing is not up for negotiation. You will not threaten her. You will not abandon your child. I won't allow it. The air in the room was thick with shock. Mark and his parents stared at Amelia as if she had grown a second head. They had come expecting to intimidate a heartbroken, hysterical wife into submission. They found a queen defending her territory, and they had no idea how to respond. You won't allow it? Mark finally sputtered, a laugh of pure disbelief escaping his lips. You have no say in this, Amelia. This is between me and her. He gestured dismissively toward the bed, refusing to even use Chloe's name. That's where you're wrong, Amelia said, her voice unwavering. The moment you brought your lies into our home, the moment she collapsed on our doorstep, you made this my business. You don't get to light a fire and then walk away, complaining about the smoke. She then did something that sealed the fate of everyone in the room. She turned to Chloe, her expression softening from righteous anger to pure, unadulterated compassion. Chloe, she said, her voice clear and strong. I know this is going to sound insane. And you don't have to answer me now. But when you get out of this hospital, you have nowhere to go. Mark is trying to kick me out of my home. But for now, it is still my home. And it's big enough for two. For 3-inch the offer hung in the silence, stunning, radical, and beautiful. It was an act of grace so profound it defied all logic and expectation. It was not about forgiveness. It was about protection. It was a declaration that she would not allow another woman to be broken by the same man who had broken her. Chloe stared at Amelia, her tear-filled eyes wide with disbelief and dawning hope. For the first time since she had woken up in this hospital, she saw a path forward, a glimmer of safety in a world that had crumbled around her. Empowered by Amelia's strength, a flicker of her own returned. She looked past Amelia, directly at Mark. She's right, Chloe said, her voice shaky but determined. You lied to me. You lied about everything. About her, about us, about the apartment. You don't get to decide what happens to me or my baby anymore. The defiance from both women, a united front he never could have anticipated, finally broke Mark's composure. The mask of anger fell away, revealing the weak, terrified man underneath. You're both crazy, he stammered, backing away toward the door. You're turning her against me, he accused Amelia, a pathetic last-ditch effort to reclaim the role of the victim. No, Mark, Amelia said, her voice filled with a sad finality. You did this all by yourself. Now, I think you and your parents should leave. Chloe needs to rest, defeated, speechless, and utterly stripped of his power. Mark and his parents retreated from the room. They had come for a battle, but they had already lost the war. The door clicked shut, leaving Amelia and Chloe alone in the quiet, in the aftermath of a revolution. A new, strange, and powerful alliance had been forged in the crucible of one man's deceit. In the weeks that followed, the world outside the hospital room continued to spin with the ugly mechanics of divorce and betrayal. Mark, humiliated and enraged, launched a legal assault, trying to force the sale of the house and paint Amelia as mentally unstable in court filings. His accusations were so wild, so transparently vindictive, that they only served to further isolate him. But inside the house, a different story was unfolding. True to her word, Amelia brought Chloe home from the hospital. The first few days were a study in awkward tenderness. They moved around each other like strangers in a fragile truce, the ghosts of their shared history lingering in every room. They rarely spoke of Mark. Instead, they spoke of neutral things: the weather, groceries, the baby's constant kicking. Chloe, riddled with guilt, tried to make herself small, cleaning obsessively and apologizing for her very existence. Amelia, grappling with her own waves of grief and anger, focused on the practical. She made soup. She scheduled doctor's appointments. She turned the spare bedroom, the one filled with old boxes and forgotten hobbies, into a nursery. One afternoon, as Amelia was methodically assembling a crib, a task that required all her concentration, Chloe stood watching from the doorway. "You don't have to do all this," she said softly. "I can't believe you're doing any of this." Amelia didn't look up from the confusing instruction manual. "This baby is coming, whether we're ready or not," she replied, her voice matter-of-fact. "And it deserves to have a safe place to land." "It's not the baby's fault." Chloe finally stepped into the room, her hand resting on her belly. "I know. But thank you, Amelia. You didn't owe me anything. You owed me less than nothing. You could have left me at the hospital. You could have hated me. Anyone else would have." Amelia finally stopped, looking up at the young woman who had so thoroughly upended her life. She saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, the deep-seated fear, and the overwhelming gratitude. "Oh, I've had my moments of hating you," Amelia admitted, the honesty raw and cleansing. "And I still have moments where I want to break every dish in this house. But none of that anger helps this baby. And you were lied to just as much as I was. We were just in different chapters of his book of lies. In that shared moment of truth, the final wall between them crumbled. It wasn't replaced by a seamless friendship, but by something more resilient, a partnership. They began to build their new life, piece by piece. They painted the nursery a soft, sunny yellow. They folded tiny clothes together, their hands occasionally brushing. They learned each other's rhythms, Chloe's morning sickness and Amelia's sleepless nights. They were two women, navigating the wreckage, creating a sanctuary not out of love for each other, but out of a shared love for the future, a future embodied by the innocent life that was growing with every passing day. And so I ask you, when the world breaks your heart, where do you find the strength to build something new from the pieces? True family is not always defined by blood, but by the people who show up, who stay, who help you rebuild the walls when they come tumbling down. Share this story if you believe in the power of compassion to create the most unexpected families, and comment below with a time someone showed you kindness when you least deserved it, but needed it the most. Remind someone today that their capacity for grace is their greatest strength.